Our world is facing unprecedented challenges. Climate change is altering natural balance. And our precious wildlife is struggling to survive. We are battling a new era of conflict and violence. There's the disruptive impact from digital technologies and shifting demographics with gaping inequalities. Now, a global epidemic is reshaping our world as we know it. We are at a crossroad at a time when our world seems so divided. Our world is struggling to breathe.
2020 is a time that we ask ourselves what kind of future we want. Will we form a stronger bond and connection between each of us? Or will society be more divided? 2045. What the future will look like depends on the choices and action we make now, today. 2020 must be a year of dialogue, when we come together to discuss how we can build a better future for all of us, especially for youth. Today's youth may account only for 20% of the population, but you represent 100% of the future. Your voice matters. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Youth Future Global Dialogue on the day of the United Nations 75th anniversary. This dialogue is part of a series of Youth Future Global Dialogues. It is sponsored by Buddha Tzu Chi Foundation, co-organized with the De Hong International Chinese School. It is related to the largest conversation, United Nations 75th Dialogue. We'll share the outcome of discussion today to the United Nations to make your voice heard by the world leaders. Have I introduced myself? Hi, my name is Roger. I'm an alumnus from University of California, San Diego. Also an active Tzu Chi volunteer. I just graduated this year. It's truly an honor and pleasure for me to be your moderator for today. Before proceeding to the program, I'd like to make some few reminders. So we will ask you all to have your camera off and kept muted during the panel session time, kind of starting from now. And if you haven't renamed yourself, please do so now. So if you're attending from United States, please put your state acronym in the bracket in front of your name. If you're from the rest of the world, please put your full country name in the bracket in front of your name. And if you see FC, that's our facilitators in the breakout room later today. And all of you guys have RSVP'd the event and should receive 2 forms. If you're under age 18, please sign both media consent form and parental permission for minor form and return us by email. If you're 18 or older, you only need to sign the media consent form. And I would now like to briefly go over the agenda for today. So first hour, we have our panel session. And following that, we have a Q&A session where we will collect questions from all of you, and we'll try to answer them in the Q&A session. Following that, we have a very short break, a 3-minute break, before we move on to our group discussion in the breakout room. And we'll come back to the main room to make the closing remark. Okay, so, all right, we know this is a global dialogue, and you might be curious where the rest of fellow are coming from. So I would like to ask you all to annotate on this map to show where you're currently at. I would like to ask you to all annotate with a heart image. If you don't know how to annotate, go to the view option on the top from the Zoom window, choose annotate, and the top bar should appear, and you want to look for the annotation tool, and go look for the check mark icon. There should be a heart image inside. Okay, seems like I'm gonna give like 10, 20 seconds for all of you have the chance to annotate. Wow. Oh, wow. Okay, seems like you guys got it. So if you're still confused how to do it, go to the top of your Zoom window, look for the tool, vision view option tool, and you should see the annotation tool. And in the check mark icon, you'll see the heart image. Okay, well, okay, I'll give another 10 seconds for you all to annotate. Thank you for your participation. Well, we see a lot of them actually coming from East Coast and West Coast of the United States. But well, we also have friends joining from Asia as well. I think it's Malaysia, Taiwan, China, and also I think my friend from Australia. But yeah. Okay. Or some from middle of ocean. Very creative. But thank you all. Thank you for your participation and welcome to the dialogue here. Thank you. All right, and actually before we move, I should take a screenshot, or Jonah can take the screenshot. Okay. Oh yeah, actually we're recording right now, so this should be automatically screenshot. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So now we're ready to start the panel session, and we're very excited and honored to have 5 remarkable young professionals here to share with us their perspective with us. And I want to introduce each of them. So first, I want to introduce Emily. Hi, Emily. Do you want to turn on camera and say hi and tell us where are you connecting from?
Hi, Roger. Hi, everyone. I am connecting from Miami, Florida. So nice to meet everyone virtually.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah, it must be cold over there. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so Emily, she's actually a biomedical research scientist at the Miller School of Medicine at the University of Miami. And she earned her doctorate degree in human genetics from Harvard Medical School. She fostered her passion for volunteering in college through Tzu Chi. She later became a Tzu Chi certified commissioner, and she coordinated many scholarship programs and volunteer training conference, mentoring many youth. Thank you, Emily. All right, and next, I would like to introduce Elliot. Hi, Elliot. Do you want to tell us where you joined from?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Elliot, and I'm calling in from Shanghai, China today.
Oh, wow, good morning. Must be early for you. Thank you so much. So Elliot, yeah, he's a sustainability leader and a subject teacher at the Hong International Chinese School in Shanghai. He coordinates compliance with sustainable development standard, as well as overseeing academic integration and the development of service learning programs. Elliot also taught at the British International School in the UAE and has worked in various industries, including financial service and hospitality, before he moved to the education 6 years ago. Thank you, Elliot. Next, I would like to introduce Grace. Hi, Grace. Where are you joining from?
Hi, I am in New York, Brooklyn, New York, actually. Really nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. New York, nice. And yeah, Grace she's a strategist at Purpose International Strategy Consultancy. Through UN Habitat, she led a group of 15 designers, including half North Korean refugee youth and half South Korean, to co-design hypothetical unified Korean education system. She also holds a Master of Fine Art in Design for Social Innovation from the School of Visual Arts in New York. And she also teach over there graduate courses on mapping for visualization and community design. Thank you, Grace. Next, I want to introduce Dooree. Hi, Dooree. Don't tell us where you're connecting from.
Hi, good morning from Jeju Island in South Korea.
Wow, good morning too. Also had to woke up early. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, thank you. Dooree has worked in UN Secretariat as a public information assistant and peace-building officer at UNICEF in Bosnia and Herzegovina. His UNICEF work include providing dialogue platform for youth with local government and NGOs for social cohesion and contributing to the promotion and capacity building for STEM education for young girls in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Dooree also lived over 10 different countries and loved to travel. Thank you, Dooree. Last but not least, I want to introduce Dustin. Hey, Dustin, want to say hi, telling us where you joined from?
Thanks so much, Roger. Hope everyone's taking care and staying safe. I'm Dustin calling in from Long Island, New York, so not that far from Grace.
Oh, wow, also New Yorker. Thank you, Dustin. Yeah, Dustin is currently the 9th U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations, where he worked actively to connect young people to global issues. He's a graduate student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a graduate assistant for school innovation at MIT. He's also a certified Zumba instructor and loves to play cello for others. Very, very cool, very cool. Thank you, Dustin. Okay, so before actually letting panelists to share, want to go over this first. So you can ask your question during the panel session on Slido. You can join Slido simply by just go to slido.com, enter that number 2045, or you can scan that QR code and access it. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible in a Q&A session afterward, after this panel session. Okay, so the first question I want to ask all of you panelists is that what's the future 2045 you want to see in your field? And what are the main obstacle challenges that prevent us from achieving that? Emily, if we can go with you first.
Yeah, sure, Roger. So as a scientist, obviously, this is a big topic for me. I can say that science has revolutionized the way we live our lives, and it will continue to do so for the next 25 years in ways that I cannot even imagine. And so when I say science, I mean the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So for example, in the past 100 years, we have dramatically reduced the number of deaths from infectious disease, starvation, war, accidents, and other factors that would have shortened our lives than the 70 years global average life expectancy that we have today. But, you know, using the word progress means that we're not there yet. We haven't solved all the problems. And since we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, I wanted to use this as an example to highlight a challenge that we face. So as this pandemic spread around the globe, scientific communities from the academic and government laboratories to small biotech companies, multinational pharmaceutical corporations have all mobilized to develop therapeutics and vaccines at unprecedented speeds. So for comparison, a drug traditionally that's made in the United States takes about 10 to 15 years to develop, costing on average $1 billion US. So that translates to a lot of time and a lot of money. And that's because we need to design the drug, make the drug and test it and keep repeating this process over and over again until we find one that works efficiently and safe to give to every person. But because pharmaceutical companies are still companies and in the end they need to make a profit, there is this conflict between commercial interests and the benefits of public health investment. So meaning a lot of information about drug development is proprietary so that only that company can make the drug. And academic institutions like mine also has their own interests to protect. Recently, it was reported that nations representing 13% of the world's population had already acquired half the vaccine doses that were promised that are in clinical trial now. And so that's why there's constant negotiations to try to get the companies to share their information so that other companies can also make the vaccines and have them distributed more widely in a way that can end this pandemic sooner than later. Another example is, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is very similar to the SARS-CoV. They are 80% genetically similar. So drug discovery efforts to fight off the SARS epidemic had stopped when the virus seemed to have disappeared within the year 2000, 2023. But if those drug discovery efforts had been continued, even though, you know, the epidemic had ended, because we know there is always a possibility for future epidemics, then we might have had a drug available today to help treat COVID-19 when it first appeared. So that's why I'm excited about this COVID Moonshot initiative. Is something that I imagine that we could aim for in the future. It uses a crowdsourced approach that's open science to develop an effective antiviral compound against SARS-CoV-2. So over 14,000 different chemical compounds have been submitted by chemists all around the world for testing. And the goal is to find a compound that will be easy and cheap to make, made freely to anyone around the world. So it is not for profit, and therefore there will be no patents resulting from this drug effectively decoupling public health investment from commercial interests. So as Mary Lasker has said, if you think research is expensive, try disease. And so we need more open and accessible science, especially to tackle global health problems like the COVID-19 pandemic. And I hope these kinds of efforts continue to grow into the future so that we are ready to respond to all kinds of health emergencies, big or small. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, vaccine development definitely very tough, but glad to hear that people are working at without the financial incentive. Thank you. And I want to move on to Elliot. As a sustainability leader and subject teacher, how can you improve the current education system? And on the other side, for sustainability, how are you doing with environmental protection? Go ahead.
Yeah, like you say, so I'm going to talk about two aspects, but I think that they are very, very connected. The UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, not everybody knows about. I'm sure a lot of people here do, but more broadly, many people don't realize just how broad they are. When you talk about sustainability, people often think I need to recycle, I need to stop using single-use plastics and things like that, but actually the problems that we're facing are much more complex, and they go into all aspects of human life and our place in the natural world. I want to just start by giving a sort of a brief definition what sustainability and sustainable development means. Sustainable development means when we are using resources in a way where they're not being depleted. And there's another term, and that talks about regenerative development. So we, the human race, we are existing in a world where lots of other things are living. There are lots of very delicate ecosystems that need to remain in a certain balance in order for us and everything else to continue to live and thrive. And for hundreds or thousands of years, we have been depleting the resources and slowly changing the ecosystems that are around us. We can look for sustainable development, meaning that we can continue to develop as a race without continuing to harm the systems that we rely on. But so much damage has been done, we also need to make efforts to regenerate what's around us. The reason I say that is because it's really to highlight that these problems can't be tackled, can't be solved if people aren't aware of them. And awareness can begin in education. That's where it can start, not just by making people consciously aware, but also by preparing young people to solve very complex problems by giving them the skills they're going to need. So if I get into my talking points, I would like to see more opportunities for children to build broad sets of practical skills and an understanding of how they can be applied practically. So at the moment, a lot of education systems focus very heavily on quite narrow, measurable skills, and they have very modular curriculums. So we're going to look at Henry VIII and his wives, so we're going to look at this period of history, we're going to look at this narrow particular mathematical skill. And it's very good, because it builds a foundation for more complex skills to be taught later. But it doesn't give students the opportunity to practice how those skills can be applied outside of the narrow context that they're learning them in. And so I'd like to see schools giving students the opportunity to develop skills that can be applied in a different range of settings to solve problems. Starting at a lower age, obviously, because when we're talking about very young elementary school children, we can't just plonk a problem in front of them. How do we solve deforestation and expect them to solve it? But we can start with smaller problems, and we can guide them through the steps so that they're learning how to identify what the next small section is and what they need to do to move through that. And I would like to see, to allow that to happen, schools where students aren't just studying individual subjects, but they're working on projects, which start small, and you get the students engaged with something, and then you build and you guide them through it. And at a higher level, in middle schools, in secondary schools, students can be coming up with their own problems and their own projects, and teachers are more facilitators of learning, who guide them through the process where that help's needed. Modular curriculums that we've got at the moment, like I say, they develop those basic skills, but they're not leaving room for high level cognitive functions to be strengthened, and they're not really giving the opportunity for students to practice more complex problem solving skills. A really big part of that is fostering an open-minded view and an inquisitive nature. So where content is heavily dictated, there is actually little room for students to decide and direct their own learning. And there's this term in education, ownership of learning. And at the moment, it can often be quite token, the way that it's done in classrooms. It can be much more meaningful, where students are, through their own questions at the start of a topic, deciding what course their learning is going to take. So I would like to see much more student-directed learning, rather than the teacher having a full year plan and already knowing exactly what they need to do in each lesson. I'd like to see schools promote global citizenship and stewardship, and an understanding of the interconnectivity in the world. I'd like to see networks which cross schools and countries to connect students from different parts of the world, so that students can start to understand their place in it. At the moment, we've got a worrying trend of rising nationalism, and that leaks into education policy, creating quite an unhelpful mindset for students over the course of their education. It creates an us and them mentality, which, if it isn't natural, it's taught to us at a very young age. It is something in a way which can be helpful, because we categorize into this and other in order to make sense of the world. But when you apply that to social dynamics, you start to create us versus them groups. We don't live in a tribal world anymore. We need to be very careful about not encouraging students to see other people as them and themselves as us, because that creates all kinds of problems. I would like to see schools where students' well-being comes before academic results. I see it so much now. Students are under incredible pressure to achieve record test results every year. They're under pressure from their parents to achieve higher results, to get jobs and university places, after schools clubs on academic subjects, excessive homework, and at an elementary level, which is primarily where I teach. I see students who have very little time to actually be students. I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time. I don't want to go over. Do you know what? I'll stop there.
Thank you, Elliot. That was very great. I really like how you mentioned about that connection between the world. I think that go to communication and getting to understanding between each of us. So definitely. Next on to move on to Grace. What's your perspective on what's your 2045 look like?
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. That was beautifully said. Totally believe in the power of education. So yeah, I am a strategist, and it's a very vague job in a sense, but the word strategy is literally moving people or things or initiatives from A to B. At Purpose, this is where I work right now, we use public mobilization, storytelling to help leading organizations, philanthropies, businesses, nonprofits really move people, and we design movements. And movements as well is a very vague term, but whether it's campaigning for a social issue that you're passionate about, or a new initiative, project, medicine, etc., we do everything. And so as a young kid, I really, really loved the art of storytelling. I studied design. I hated being limited to just creative visual making because I saw design had a lot of power. And thinking of future, like the 2045, I think we're talking about. This is I'll probably be like 50.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a very big question. I don't know how to answer that. However, I hope to see a lot of creative youth be more confident in their art form, because we may be dismissed because we're visual or kind of quirky or weird, but I was that kid. And because I was curious about the world, I was able to create stuff, experiment with things, and now create an experiment with organizations like Google, Unilever, ACLU to create stories and narratives that really mobilize people. And so I would love to see designers, creatives going into companies, and companies being open to systems change and systemic thinking, design thinking, to create solutions that are not just cool, but equitable, accessible, and more friendly. We talk about technology today. That's a lot of my clients right now are in tech. And when we think about ethics, a lot of these conversations are missing. A lot of people, a lot of data are not being compiled to be equitable. They're not including people. How do we change that? I think it's all design. And so by design, through design, how do we innovate, but in a way that's more human, that's more open to everyone and not just for the extraordinary, let's say. I have a personal interest in philanthropy, did a lot of research with how money moves. And in social impact, there's a lot of questions and fear around capitalism, or how we can utilize funding or literally currency to do stuff. And we need foundations in terms of monetary funds or human capital to really mobilize. And I hope to see quirky industries, quirky people, creative people leading the way, because their fearlessness and their creative confidence will really spur up new ideas. And I hope the world becomes ready for that. Yeah, that's me.
Okay, thank you, great. Yeah, I like how you mentioned about the design and the innovative part is definitely important to incorporate and to like develop more. Thank you, Grace. I want to move on to Dooree.
Yes.
All right, take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
See me? Okay, so I mean, first of all, I'd like to start off, my panels. The topic that I'm going to talk about is the United Nations, which is a huge topic that I feel would be impossible to talk about in a few minutes. But since we have a lot of youth, I think it's important to have at least a basic idea of what the UN is. So just really fast, it was founded in 1945 after World War II to prevent another world war from happening, with three main goals: peace and security, development, and human rights. And there was a demand for an organization where countries can come together to talk about these issues. And essentially, it's a membership of all the countries in the world. And the UN is really the platform for them to come together to talk about these issues and make decisions. And the decisions are made through voting by each country. And each country's governments will send their representatives to represent the countries and their opinions. So your country will send their representatives to voice their opinions. That's how the decisions are made. Now, keeping this in mind, I want to talk about the next points and try to think about this context. The future that I want in 2045 in my field is, first of all, stronger global and regional cooperation. In the context of the UN, it means better support for global issues, everyone willingly coming together to work on the same goals, because like I said, UN resolutions pass through votes of countries, and if all the countries want different things, it's hard to reach a consensus. So second point is less polarization and stronger social cohesion. And basically, polarization is a division of two contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs, which can cause hostility. And on the other hand, it's stronger social cohesion. Social cohesion, it's really the willingness of members of a society to want to participate and cooperate with each other for basically survival and to prosper. Now, the next point is access to quality education for all, but I'll explain the next points in detail a bit later. The next point is better system of accountability for marginalized groups and issues. And finally, it's a fair and efficient global governance. Now, global governance, in simple terms, it's how the world is run or should be run. Now, the world's always going through a process of trial and error, and you can say we're still going through that stage. This is what we have now, which really leads me to my first obstacle in achieving these goals, which is an unfair power struggle within global affairs. The UN has 6 organs or bodies, and the Security Council is one of them. The main purpose is to maintain peace and security. It has 15 members, where 5 members are permanent members and 10 are non-permanent, which means the 5 members don't have a term, they're always there. Plus they have a veto power, which means if they try to vote on something, they say no, it won't pass. And that's why it's one of the bodies that are most criticized in the UN. And unfortunately, it can lead to inefficiencies when making decisions. Second point is the self-interest of countries and governments or corporations. If countries don't have the will to support a decision, or if they wish not to, they don't have to. Like an example is maybe the Paris Climate Agreement. If you've heard about this, it's really a global response on the threat of climate change. And President Trump didn't believe in climate change, and he withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. Which leads to my next point, is the lack of will or support from higher levels. I mentioned that the UN's representatives are people sent by our governments to represent the opinions of our countries. And this is important because if your country's representatives represent something that you don't believe in, or they don't do something that you think should be done, then who are the ones that can make them change their minds or take the decisions? It's us, it's you and me. And so, it's really important to really try to advocate for the future that we want. I think I'm running out of time. The next one is no system of accountability for marginalized groups or topics, such as climate change, refugees, or indigenous peoples. There's, topics that where countries will care about something and will try to push forward in achieving them, while some topics, they won't be interested in them. And this is important again, because if the UN or if our governments don't try to help or change these things, then who will? I'll try to cut it short. The next point is polarization. Again, it's propaganda, fake news, extremism. Right now we live in one of the most polarized times in history. There's widespread extremism, there's fake news that continue to divide people through ideologies, discrimination. Certain level of differences is okay, but as long as we can agree on our differences and coexist. But extreme differences in ideology can create hostile environments, discrimination, which can lead to violent conflicts. The last point I want to make is the lack of interest or engagement from the public. This is probably the most important point, because we are the ones, again, that can influence the decisions of decision makers. If no one is interested in what we all say, you do you, leave me alone, I don't care, then shouldn't you need to know, first of all, what your country is doing, be able to stand up for what's right and what's wrong? This is something that I wish we can all take with us when the seminar is done, caring about what's happening in the world with our governments, what's going on, because that's the only way that we can make a change. And that's really the first step, which is caring. Yeah.
Thank you, Dooree. I very agree with the point you point out, especially like to bring out the awareness from the public, to get attention, to get support. Thank you so much. And now I want to move on to Dustin. And actually, you just become the youth observer for the United Nations Association for the USA. So I want to say congrats on that. What do you hope to see?
Well, this is not just a hard panel to follow, it's an impossible panel to follow, so it takes some of the pressure off. So while most of my work professionally is in the field of education and aligns really well with Elliot's work on global citizenship and the intersection of education and labor, my primary role as the US Youth Observer to the United Nations is to connect young people to the work of the UN. So from this lens, I frame my field as youth engagement. And in 2045, I hope that all young people see themselves as problem solvers, right? Problem solvers for our world's most complex and pressing issues. And the way I frame this in most speaking engagements is that we have to have the imagination of a second grader. So I always like to share a story about a workshop that we held just a few months ago in a second grade classroom where everyone drew a picture of what they hope to see in 2045. And in the second grade classroom, there was a 6-year-old named Shivani, and she drew a picture of world peace. So she drew a peace sign on a globe, and she drew people of different colors and creeds and music and peace. And then I asked her a really simple question. I was like, Shivani, how are we going to make this happen? And she said, she looked at me like I was stupid, like I was crazy, like I had 7 heads. And she said, I'm just going to make sure that everyone in my life is kind. And the confidence and the clarity by which she said that made me realize that we lose our sense of imagination and our ability to imagine a better world. So we really need to push back against complacency. So something that I really love to talk about is our ability to reignite that spark, because complacency cannot be an option. Right, Grace talked a little bit about systems change, and I completely agree that systems need to be dramatically reimagined. Relationships need to be transformative, and young people really do bring the energy that we need in this moment. I think something that's really another obstacle that I've seen, especially talking to young people, is that we need to disrupt what our idea of youth leadership is. Right? Youth leaders are not just the ones on the front page of the newspaper leading protests. We need to reimagine what social change looks like, because it requires, like Grace mentioned, systems change and movement building. Right? Youth leadership means more than the person who's on the front lines. We need to reimagine the role of healers, the role of educators, the role of disruptors, right? We all have gifts that tie to this moment, and we really need to think about how our gifts meet the change that we want to see in the world. The last thing that I'll talk about is paralysis and burnout, right? Over the past few weeks, especially, I've been feeling tired and a little bit burned out. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we need to practice self-care in order to keep the movement going. When I talk to 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, they're like, okay, so I'm in the social change movement. Do I have to be sprinting until I die? And it's this really interesting conversation to say, hey, it's a marathon, not a race, right? So the ways in which we need to maintain our energy, really maintain our hope, are critical to taking down these barriers that are just so apparent when we think about young people making a difference in the world. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, Dustin. Yeah, I like the analogy that you point out, and then also self-care. I feel like a lot of people are not really pay attention to. But yeah, I think that's a key, like keep the motivation going. Thank you so much. And now I would like to move on to the second question to all of you. Is that you all mentioned the difficulty challenge that that's in front of your what you want to see. How do we overcome those obstacles that you just described? And I think specifically, what do you think the world should prioritize in your field to recover better from this pandemic? And we can continue from Dustin.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Back to back, I needed to take a little sip of water. So I think the first thing that we need to do is center youth voices. We need to fight against ageism because young people have such wisdom, right? My 6-year-old Shivani taught me that day that I really needed to reignite my second grade energy. And I think young people are impacted by global issues every day. I love to share this story of a focus group that we held in Jackson County, Oregon, when I first started my term earlier in the summer. I was in a focus group and this young person shared, climate change is so hard to understand. Sometimes it feels as though you need a PhD in order to make a change, right? What do I know about CO2? What do I know about, sustainability? I feel like it's really hard to understand. Fast forward 2 months, unfortunately, Jackson County, Oregon was hit by the wildfires that ravaged the West Coast. And I remember getting a call from this youth organizer who said, you know, Dustin, climate change is really not that hard to understand when my entire community is burned down, right? Climate change is really not that hard to understand when my friend calls me and says, my childhood home is in ashes right now. And I think it's really important to recognize that young people have the wisdom to meet this moment. Knowledge is just rumor until it lives in the muscle. But I really think that we have the videos, the stories, and the lived experiences, as well as the data to let this knowledge live in the muscle. So as much as possible, we need to honor the fact that young people understand these large, complex global issues because they're being impacted by them every day. The second thing that I think we need to do, going back to Dooree's point, we need to build better together. We need to build better across age lines, across borders, across difference. And we need to recognize that the importance of multilateralism is so salient in this moment. And in doing so on UN Day, we need to recognize that there is such importance in terms of these multilateral institutions like the UN. And it's only become truer since we've become more connected with technology and globalization, right? Our well-being as individuals, cities, states, and countries depends on the well-being of those around the world. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Secretary General Antonio Guterres shared that everything we do during the crisis, before and after, and during, will have to have a strong focus on building more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies. And I think that is due to the fact that gaps in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals have been made self-evident in this moment, and we really need to think about how we build better together. Connecting back to what's already been shared on the power of education, we really need to give young people the tools that they need to make change. And I think oftentimes we give young people so much information on the gaps that are there, right? I remember I had a disconnect in my life. I felt like my work with Tzu Chi was giving me the tools of how to make change, working in communities. And then in school, I was just bombarded with statistics and headlines and figuring out these gaps that were there. I think as much as possible, we need to merge the two. We need to mend the gap and help students have the experience where they are activated and they have an ability to make change. As much as possible, I think narrative capital is so important. We can't just have folks learn about people making change. We need them to experience it and have the ability to talk about that experience of making change. That's how it lives in the muscle. So I think as much as possible, especially on this UN Day, I'm reminded of the UN's mission to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. And right now, as we honor 75 years later, since these words have changed the world, they feel more relevant than ever. And I think in this moment, we really need to maintain our hope. So especially in the face of this pandemic, I'll end with the words of the illustrious activist Brittany Packnett Cunningham. And she often shares in speaking engagements that she chooses the discipline of hope over the ease of cynicism. And she chooses fortitude over fatalism. And I'll say that again because I get really excited about it. She chooses the discipline of hope over the ease of cynicism. She chooses fortitude over fatalism. And I think as much as possible, we need to work together. We need to maintain that hope. And it's only doing so that we'll be able to build better and recover together.
Thank you, Dustin. Definitely, yeah, maintaining the hope, something I very agree with as well, that to keep people momentum going to shape to a better world. Thank you, Dustin. Moving on to Dooree. How do we overcome the obstacle that you described earlier, like cooperation between local and then global level, support from higher level? Dooree, go ahead.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Dustin. That was, really quite inspirational, the last quote. Now, how do we overcome these obstacles that I just mentioned in the context of the UN? I'm going to say one answer when it comes to answering this question, and it's you. Everyone, everything I say from now on is going to be based on how really all of us can make a change. Because we are having a youth future global dialogue, and we're all the main players in this. And first of all, most of you, I presume, are in your youth, and really you're the ones who have the capability of creating your future. You're the ones that can start making the changes now so that the future can be different 10, 15 years later. I'm in my 30s now, and 10 years seems like yesterday to me, so trust me, it comes really fast. The first point I want to make is finding compassion, passion, and compassion. You know, it's great to find passion, something that you're truly passionate about, and what you want to pursue. But the difference between passion and compassion, you know, compassion is being empathetic towards those who are around you, who are suffering, and wanting to alleviate or make better the struggling and pains of others. You know, think about what you're most compassionate about. And it's okay to not have any, because it doesn't just come out of anywhere. You know, we usually become compassionate towards a family member who's terminally ill, a neighbor who's lost his job, towards animals who lost their natural habitat, and so on. But you know, this is kind of in line with what the UN's main goals are. Do you remember what the three were? It was peace and security, development, and human rights. You know, this, if you think about it, it stems from compassion. As human beings, we're able to have compassion for those who've suffered from wars, for those who've lost their homes and families, their lives because of wars. You know, we're able to feel compassion for those who are struggling to find food, or living in extreme poverty. You know, we feel compassion for those who aren't able to express their opinions, who are treated unfairly. You know, for children who aren't able to live in safe environments where they can't go to school or even play. You know, yes, you know, being able to play is actually a basic human right as well, you know. And this is really the core of making the difference in the world, because especially if you're in this field, without compassion, it's really hard to sustain that momentum in working for that bigger goal that you're trying to achieve, you know. So in short, you know, I mean, you know, try to find your passion and see how you can use that to fulfill your compassion. You know, I don't mean to sound cliche, but if everyone had enough compassion, we wouldn't have most of the problems in the world, because we would all be helping each other. Now, the second point leads to quality education. This is critical thinking, you know, on an individual level, or enhancing the quality of education within countries on a sort of country level. Now, quality education is the foundation of achieving the goals of peace, development, and human rights, because it teaches us to be able to think critically. It enables us to determine what's right and wrong, helps us to develop our opinions, and gives us, you know, the capacity to make right what's wrong, and to come up with ways where we can find solutions to problems around the world. And you know, it also helps us to analyze what's fake news, what's a legitimate source of information, which can again prevent polarization and extremism. And especially it's important in the context of the world today and the, you know, context of the COVID-19 pandemic. I can presume most of you here are receiving some of the best quality education in the world. You're off to a good start, you know, but unfortunately, there are many other youth in the world who aren't able to receive this basic education. And so in a way, you're very empowered through education to be able to take a stand, to stand up for your rights, to act as people who can make a change. And it's really a powerful tool, because it's something that we can take for granted. And this is one of the main themes that the UN is working towards, since it's also one of the SDGs, number 4, which leads me to my next point, youth engagement and empowerment. You know, just quickly, one of my main things that I did in UNICEF in Bosnia and Herzegovina was to bring youth together in platforms like this, and giving them a voice of what they wish they wanted for their future. You know, so government leaders, institutions, from media, all sectors, they came together to listen to their voices so that they can listen to what the future leaders of the country wanted for their future. You know, topics discussed were like lack of trust from the governments, to their education system not being non-practical. But the important thing is that these things weren't taken lightly. And this was actually, it led to the government officials taking them into account for changing policies, for improving and investing in the education system. And so again, this is my firsthand experience of what the power of youth, you know, our voices can do to influence our future. And this stems again from having that passion and compassion and taking action towards achieving our goals. So, you know, how do we do this? Next point is continuous dialogue and advocacy. Keep talking about it. You know, if you're at the stage now where you don't know what to do, it's fine, but keep looking and searching for the things you wish, you know, could change, of what you think is wrong with the world. And if you found something that you like, be the best at it, you know, own that thing. And after, especially after you listen to this webinar, I hope that you can, you know, you could just go about your day and, oh, that was great, or you can start taking action. And, you know, the fact that you're here already it shows that you have at least the slightest interest in having a dialogue to making the future better. So yeah, the more people talk about it, and the more you'll start to get noticed, which leads to my final point, which is adding pressure to the leaders from the grassroots level. Remember, your country's government sends a representative to voice your opinions on the global stage. Now, how can we make the representatives, how can we make them represent your voice on the global stage? It's by doing exactly what I mentioned. These actions will be noticed by your politicians, by your local leaders, where they can, bring it to the global stage, where they can address the entire world. And even if your government isn't able to represent itself, your voices will still eventually be heard by the international community. Yeah, and I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Dooree. That was great. Next, if I can have Grace, talk about how we overcome those to become like more accessible, friendly design that you mentioned.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, I think the obstacles, though, that prevent us from achieving these goals or dreams or visions is old power. I don't mean to be like ageist or just, condemn old people or anything, but I mean the ways in which power has been used and abused in the past by a certain group of people, ethnicity, or history. And so I have a personal grudge against kind of like paternalistic ageism, because I've always been a little bit fast and had the opportunity to do things when I was really young. And all these adults were like, what are you doing here? Or kind of like patronizing in a way. And I think it really takes away power from youth when they actually are kind of smarter and sometimes even more creative in kind of designing solutions. So sorry about the noise, this is New York. When I'm doing my work at Purpose, we do a lot of co-creations. And in those co-creations, we invite youth to, let's say, like a project with Google, literally. And the question that all these companies have is, what do Gen Zers think about XYZ? Or how do we know to create a future for them? And the funny thing is they don't invite these youth. And I think the obstacle here is literally you have to co-create with them because they're going to be living this life. And it's hard because youth, because of their age, they might not feel like they have power, but they do. However, I do think industries and people in the leadership have to be open to the fact that you have to be inviting. You have to be open, not only for your business, but literally for those insights to create something that's worthwhile. I think everything is political. Every choice you make, yes, they say don't bring your politics to the dinner table, but everything you do is literally political from now on because of our world in a way, where you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask, it feels like a sense of choice. And while it's at that, I think we have to ask, like, what are we actually choosing? How are we appealing to the world? What are we saying to the world? And how do we create language around what we want to say? Because I think there's a lack of imagination, like Dustin said. There's no words to describe what we're going through. We have to create and design, literally theorize what we want to live because it's unprecedented times. Like literally, we have no vocab to kind of phrase what we're going through, whether it's emotional or political or infrastructure related. And so I think the international community needs to be open to the fact that youth today are bombarded with information much more than they were in the past. Now, with that opportunity, how do we invite them as leaders, as respected individuals who will be carrying out this future that we all talk about, and position ourselves to give them power so that they don't always ask or want to be in rooms, but how do we create those rooms? And, sometimes even bring a folding chair, because some organizations will not be open to that. I hope that made sense. I'm excited to hear about other panelists.
Thank you, Grace. And now we want to move on to Elliot. Go ahead and take away.
I'll try to keep it brief this time. So thinking about moving away from modular education, I think that schools need to empower teachers to change their approach to education. I had to make the move. I was trained in the UK. I was trained to teach subject-based, and then I took a job at a new school one day in the international system, and I was told we do inquiry, and I thought, what does that mean? and it's a little bit of a daunting task as someone who's been trained and been practicing for a number of years to completely change how you're doing your job. But that's I think we need to remove or empower teachers by removing pressure in a way to have everything perfect the first time. And that's allowing creativity and inquisitiveness in educational professionals as well. So we need to make that move towards project-based learning, towards inquiry-based learning. And if national governments and education departments and bureaus aren't open to and ready for that yet, schools can try that themselves, and they can train and upskill teachers, and they can try to apply it themselves. Embracing new research and good examples is a really important part of that. So we've had for such a long time in education a fantastic example, which is how it's done in Northern Europe. They do project-based learning. They're not doing maths or this or that, and it's talked about so often, and then a school will just say, yeah, and that's a brilliant way, and then carry on. So I think there needs to be an enthusiasm and a willingness to embrace these new ways of doing things. For open-mindedness and inquisitive nature, we need to be not just allowing but encouraging students to decide the direction of their classroom learning. And to do that, we need to teach them how to ask good questions and how to answer them independently or with guidance from their teacher. One example I'll give is a project that I'm planning at the moment for some students in my school that we're going to run at the end of this academic year. The science content that we need to teach is around friction and Newtonian forces, and we could do that in a very traditional way, but we're choosing instead to do it on a project about road safety. So we're going to introduce the idea that students need to go out and find out, first of all, about how many cars are traveling down their road, and then they need to go online and they're going to need to research about road traffic accidents. As teachers, we're going to be able to weave in the key science knowledge, but that's going to be within the context of a project that the students are directing themselves, which is going to include lots of different complex problems that we need to help them solve. So there's an example. When I was talking about interconnectedness, we can bring that in to the classroom learning as well. So I'm involved in service learning, and what that means is engaging with communities or making sure that the learning actually serves a purpose beyond developing this skill or that skill. So with this project, what the students will be doing is creating a report, a scientific report about what's going on in the local community on the roads, and then actually presenting that to local government and local police with a recommendation for how they can improve it. So you're doing projects, you're doing skills learning, and you're also contributing back to the community, which is encouraging students to understand that they are empowered, they are able to make a difference. For global citizenship, I think that's something that can be done on an individual level. You know, inside the classroom, teaching empathy, teaching a sense of togetherness, and destroying that concept that I talked about earlier of us versus them. It can be done through creating policies for students from different schools or cities to collaborate on learning, and that would be an enormous task, but I don't think that there's anything that we can't do if we work together. And like I said, we can also get students more involved in their communities and the learning that's going on. As far as taking pressure off students, I think it really has to come from the highest level. So there is so much pressure from governments on schools in certain countries to get high results. Financial incentives are awarded to higher achieving schools. If that pressure is reduced on the schools, pressure is taken off the teachers, pressure comes off the students. And then students can have the opportunity to take a step back if they need to. if we teach them about self-awareness, emotional well-being, and actually give them the opportunity to take a little step back when they feel overwhelmed, I think that we can really give them a chance to thrive, because someone who can't self-manage, who's not self-aware and doesn't have the opportunity to do what they need to for themselves, is never going to be able to fulfill their potential. I think I'm going to have to stop there.
Thank you, Elliot. That was very great. Thank you so much. And our last panelist, Emily.
Yes, that was really great from everyone. For me, other than creating the right frameworks to promote more open science initiatives, fighting COVID-19 is also about human cooperation. So I'm glad to hear the other panelists share similar insights. For example, we confirmed through research in a study using ferrets that the coronavirus is being transmitted by air back in July. But the key to stopping the spread of the virus is on the people. And this becomes a very big challenge because this requires people to change their daily behavior that is deeply rooted in their own habits and cultures. So people needed to start wearing masks and physically distance from their friends and family even. But there was and is still a lot of debate out there on whether these measures are necessary. So in general, scientists just focus on doing the research and leave science communication to other sectors like the media or public authorities. But in this case, more than ever, I think it is important for scientists themselves to take on more responsibilities in communicating and educating the public. Science is about understanding the world and using the evidence we gather to explain phenomena that we observe or experience. And this scientific evidence is not perfect, even conflicting, and it's our job to debate and come up with theories that best explains these phenomena. So communication of scientific findings needs to reflect the research as well as the uncertainties underlying assumptions and limitations of these findings. Communication is difficult because it does take time to have strong scientific conclusions and time that we don't have to accumulate as much evidence as possible because of the rapid spread of the coronavirus and the quick timeframes that's needed to develop policy decisions to fight the pandemic. But we can't let this debate lead the public to ignore science. So I think we do need to build a culture where science communication is an important part of our training as scientists and create more opportunities for us to go out and talk to the public so that people will pay attention to what we're saying in urgent times like these, like the one that we're in right now. Another way of saying this is that, I hope to become a responsible scientist, meaning someone who takes on these additional responsibilities to help make our society better, similar to what Elliot mentioned about being a global citizenship just now. And I hope that you can all become, a responsible professional in whatever career you choose to pursue in the future. So for those of you who are Tzu Chings, you all know the history of Tzu Chi and how Master has done extraordinary things. So, one of the things that you could do, as the other panelists have suggested, you can speak up and don't underestimate your own ability to create change.
Thank you, Emily. Very well put in. Yeah, that's all the question for the panel session time. I'm very inspired to hear this great sharing from all of you. And now we would like to move on to our Q&A session. So let me look at Slido. We will go ahead and pick the one that has the most question, go from that order and try to answer as many as possible. So I'm just gonna pick the first one. So I see the first question with the most like is, it was how to decrease polarization when the way we socialize with those not physically close to us is designed to unintentionally increase it. Oh, okay, yeah. Any panelists, anyone would like to quickly respond to that? Dustin,
I'm
you
happy
look
to
like you
kick
want
off.
to say. Go ahead, thank you.
I think that at the root of it, we really need to start reassessing the distance that we assume between each other, right? I think at the end of the day, when you talk about the socialization of the way in which we get polarized on social media, it comes from the assumption that it's us versus them. And I think as much as possible, when I talk to young people, how do we approach things from a place of consensus? How do we approach things from a place of at least we can agree that, ... I think it's really important to also exercise empathy with humility. I think empathy is thrown around a lot and it's like, oh, I can empathize with someone and I understand where they're coming from. But to exercise empathy with humility requires us to understand that there's more to learn. And I think at the end of the day, I truly believe that we can agree that we want greater prosperity, that we want an opportunity for folks to have quality education. And it's a matter of how we get there, where we get a little bit confused. So to start off, I think, reframing it as not an us versus them, but this is an opportunity for us to understand our differences and understand that we're more alike than different is a way in which you can begin that conversation.
Thank you, Dustin. For the interest of time, I'm just gonna go choose another question, and then I think any panelists who haven't answered can go ahead and take away if you like. So the next question I see a lot like is, what can we as high school students and college students do to increase global cooperation? So any panelists would like to answer that question?
I could answer that. I think the follow-up question to this is, why do you want to increase global cooperation? What is the objective here? I guess I saw a lot of likes, but if the why is clear, you can totally bring affinity to the reason being or the mission that you have as a group. I mean, you all know the world is so super connected, right? It's really easy to find your tribe if you know the why, if you know your intentions first. And then to know your intentions, you have to know yourself. I think we all have this headspace of like, I want to change the world, I want to do something for something, or I want to build community because XYZ. But I think it really begins with understanding who you are and what your values are and how you design your principles for life. And then going out and finding your tribe, because we can't do it alone. And so if your why is really clear, I think connecting with your people wouldn't be so hard. And I think also redefine global, because global can mean literally outside of your neighborhood, your house. It could be a little bit of a different school that's next to you because it is, different. And so how do you define global? How do you define cooperation? And then why, I would ask.
Thank you, Grace. As I say, for interest time, I'll move on to the other questions so we can answer as many as possible. How do people who do not work in education participate in educating and empowering the younger generation? Really? Go ahead.
I actually think that's easier than you might think. So we've got a great example here with one of our co-organizers, Joanna. Joanna doesn't work in education, but she has been in a school in the last 12 months giving a workshop for students. Teachers are always looking for ways to expose their students to the points of view of experts out in the community and out in the real world. Get in touch with schools and share your expertise with them and ask if there's any way you can get involved in educating the students. And you can look outside of schools as well. There are lots of networks where you can share where you can share what you know, where you can share the benefit of your experience and your knowledge with young people who are looking to find their way in the world. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, how can we build stronger youth movement to tackle these large challenges we face globally and locally? Any panelists would like to answer that?
Oh, I could answer this. This is what I do every day. When we strategize for movements, it's first really important, I think, to be clear on what your problem is. Challenges today are super systemic. Everything's intersectional. Problems with feminist ideologies or objectives linked to climate change, everything is connected, right? And so how do we first define our goal and why we're building this movement? And how do we work with communities who are directly linked to this? There are community leaders who have been doing this problem-solving mission, organizing efforts for generations. Like, think of the indigenous groups in America who've been rooting for climate change for hundreds of years, and yet we're now saying climate change. How do we have that audacity is the question that I ask. There are thought leaders, historical people and communities that are doing this every day. Talk to them first, because you will never really define or be able to define the real challenge unless you get to know the people who are facing these challenges. And so don't be afraid to knock on doors. Go out and ask questions to the individuals, do your research first, and then seek how you can create action steps forward. Because a lot of the problems that come out in social innovation project is we don't define problems right. We have to reframe and rethink about these problems constantly. And also challenge our biases, because how we frame and move forward in strategizing for change or movements will really change everything. And so are you talking to those people? Are you talking to those leaders? Are you talking to the communities most impacted? And then are we facing it in a way that's creative comes next, I think.
Thank you, Grace. Next question I'd like to move on is, how can we teach individuals, those that already struggle to receive a proper education, the importance of climate change and also global cooperation in their future? Any panelists would like to answer this question?
Would you mind just repeating the question? I didn't catch the first half of it.
Of course, yeah, of course. How can we teach individuals, those that already struggle to receive a proper education, the importance of climate change and global cooperation in their future?
This is very off the top of my head, really, but I think you could link that to community outreach programs, basically, and volunteering. And if education infrastructure is not in place in a particular region, then if you like, the global network where it is in place needs to be reaching out and sharing the benefit of what's known. So that can be university students, for example, who are looking to travel and volunteer, things like that. It can be where connecting with what is in place. So schools in more developed countries making connections through technology with schools in less developed regions and opening dialogues that way. Yeah, really, I think that onus is on us to reach out and make that connection.
Maybe we have a room for last question. So how can you change the education curriculum to include discussion about sustainability, empowerment, etc.?
How do we, sorry, one more time.
Yeah, of course. How do we change the education curriculum to include discussion about sustainability and empowerment?
Okay. Well, one thing that I've been very much trying to do is link the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or the more child-friendly good life goals into our curriculum in our school. We use inquiry, and we build our own plan of inquiry for the year based on what science content or what English content we have to create. But I'm trying to train our teachers to understand what the Sustainable Development Goals are, and when they are building their respective curricula, make links and highlight those in the content that they're teaching. And I would really love to see that done more broadly. That would encourage awareness in students of the SDGs and all of the related, everything related to it. But in order to do that, teachers need to be aware as well. And that's two birds with one stone in a way, because if you're training educators on what these things mean, what are the related issues, in order to enable them to make students aware, then you're actually getting a second audience well educated on it, and they can then spread it through their lives as well.
I could just pick up on Elliot's point. I think it's so important to make the SDGs personal. We need to localize these SDGs, right? They can seem so foreign. They can seem like it's so high level, but in actuality, we see these SDGs play out in our communities every day. I think it's really important, connecting it back to that last question, that we understand that there are funds of knowledge everywhere we go, right? Even in communities where we think that folks are struggling to receive a proper education, there are funds of knowledge, and they have incredible wisdom that we need to unlock. So every single person, regardless of their path, has something to contribute to these SDGs. And I think it's important that we validate it. And it's important that we acknowledge that we have so much more to learn.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Dustin.